do when it comes to that. So we know that buildings contribute to 40% of emissions, leading to climate change. And in Africa, we still need to build because we still have the fastest growing cities. So it's trying to find that balance between building a building and it being sustainable. So that's really what I do as green design when I'm wearing my entrepreneurial hat, and completely loved what was said earlier from Rosemary in terms of just the work that's happening on the ground regionally is women getting more involved from an entrepreneurial perspective, because we will not be able to solve climate change on this continent if women and African women are not involved in that process. We cannot have a transition without them. So that's effectively just where green design came from, was really trying to address buildings. And then as the World Green Building Council, looking at what does resilience mean, and then how do we ensure that we leave no one behind, especially micro, small, and medium enterprises.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I should have mentioned that Vera is based in South Africa, but you work regionally as well, and you've been able to expand your business, I believe, into other countries, or you've been planning or focusing on that. So I want to turn now to Melanie, and in a way I would say TechnoServe needs no introduction. It's so well known for its work, so many years on in so many different areas. I mean, I know you from the agro-processing and agriculture supply chains work that you've done, very successfully in many different countries. But I'm a little less familiar with your work on technical assistance in the climate realm. And so please talk to us about how you work with your private sector solutions in climate resilience in your work, both in South Africa, where you're talking to us from, as well as across the sub-Saharan Africa region.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with these rock star women leaders. I am based in Johannesburg. I am a director at TechnoServe, and I oversee our work alongside impact investors, providing technical assistance to portfolio companies that they've invested in. As you mentioned, TechnoServe is an international nonprofit. We work in more than 30 countries to help poverty, and we work with about 500,000 farmers and businesses in Africa and Latin America each year to build regenerative farms, businesses, and markets that already work towards driving increased incomes for households in developing countries. I'm going to give an example of a business that we support under the CASA Technical Assistance Facility, which is funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, so the UK government. This is a coconut manufacturer in Kenya called Kentaste. The company identified a significant expansion opportunity that would require it to grow its output fivefold. But it faced a challenge, which many similar businesses that come to us for support do. How would it get that sort of supply from the smallholders that it currently sources from? And how could it cost effectively scale that sourcing footprint to tap into the sort of 50,000 odd smallholder farmers that are producing coconut along Kenya's coastline? So we started working with them, as I mentioned, through this facility. It is basically supporting agribusinesses to deepen or expand impact in their supply chains in ways that simultaneously drive commercial returns and obviously also support or drive greater or increased mitigation to and resilience to the impact of climate change. This inherently involves supporting them to adopt more gender-responsive business practices that obviously increase economic opportunities for women farmers. And we know that from the sort of years of work that TechnoServe has done with the private sector in this space, that these investments are going to deliver commercial returns for these businesses. For example, in the form of improved productivity, enhanced quality and quantity of supply, and increased farmer loyalty as well to these businesses. But the commercial case for this is not always clear, and so clear to our partners, and a lot of the point of our technical assistance is to demonstrate that case. Just to go back to the Kentaste example, we basically sort of identified a number of opportunities to increase farmer productivity and optimize the quantity and quality of organic supply going back to the business. Things like embedding climate smart agriculture practices into a hybrid extension model that sort of combines digital low-cost video techniques to supplement training provided by the business as field extension officers, and then also setting up farmer groups led by sort of a target of 30 to 40% women lead farmers to deliver critical information and services to those farmers on a more frequent and customized basis. But it's also obviously not only about reaching more women, but benefiting them, which benefits the business and making that case. So we intentionally look at designing actions that can really increase benefits for women and decision-making power as suppliers, workers, and also business owners. So that's really the ultimate objective of the facility. We're trying to drive increased investment in the sector through providing these strong examples of how this can sort of deliver commercial opportunities and drive commercial returns in ways that really support inclusive economic growth, enhance food security, and also, as I mentioned earlier, increase the sort of mitigation and resilience to the impact of climate change.
Great.
I'll pause there.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. And you know, that's a lot of technical assistance support. And I just want to come back to Vera and then Sarah for a moment. You know, it's great when we hear that there is technical assistance available, but all too often there isn't that support available. So I'm just wondering, Vera, in terms of your own experience as a woman entrepreneur, what were some of the biggest challenges, and what do you see as the needs in the ecosystem that either were available to you or that were needed to help you in growing your business?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I would say that for African women, there's a lot of challenges that they face when they're entrepreneurs, and then when they're entrepreneurs within the climate space. Because I would say one of the greatest challenges is data. So especially when it comes to just climate change and some of the work that's being done and being able to respond to that. But the second thing that we've seen, or that I really had to experience as an entrepreneur, is the misalignment of financing, for instance. So a lot of the women in Africa, when they do their businesses, they focus on the social impact. And sometimes they don't necessarily look at their value proposition, or they don't speak the language of an investor. And so the investor wants to de-risk their investment, even if it's microfinancing, a really small amount, just to be able to, you know, either have growth capital or any of that capital. The investor wants to invest in the woman entrepreneur, but there isn't enough capacity building for women entrepreneurs in Africa to be able to show the value proposition of their businesses and then go out and get funding. So already that's a challenge. Then I think the second challenge really is that a lot of the women entrepreneurs are working in very male-dominated spaces. And, you know, people normally don't talk about the soft side, but things like imposter syndrome really does happen. Women walk into the boardrooms and they immediately start to shrink back to their own cultural norms, which in a lot of the cultures in Africa is women not being at the forefront, women not coming up and saying, this is what I want to do. I look at women like Wangari Maathai, the late Wangari Maathai, who stood up against government as an environmentalist, and they said, who are you? You're a woman. You know, what do you think you can tell us? And I think that that's something that women entrepreneurs in Africa do also face. So I face both of those in terms of, you know, being underrepresented, not being able to align to get financing. Every finance I got as a business came from angel investors, so from family, as opposed to actually getting private equity capital or growth capital. So I think that those two challenges, finance and really just, you know, not really walking into the room confident with the solutions that the women have. That's just some of the challenges.
I have to say, you sound supremely confident today, so congratulations for that. Sarah, in your work with young women entrepreneurs in Rwanda, Is that something that you see as well? And how are you working at Westerwell to instill that sense of confidence, that sense of ownership, and also that financing and investment readiness? I mean, is that a challenge that you see in the Rwandan ecosystem? And how are you addressing that in your work?
Yes, as Vera mentioned, financing remains as one of the biggest issues. More specifically to this project, I think also financing for early stage entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, is still one of the biggest challenges. For example, if you look at the investment landscape in Rwanda, specifically also within the region, there are not that many investors that are really targeting women entrepreneurs, but also early stage entrepreneurs. So for this particular program, we really focus more on fundraising with women entrepreneurs, looking for those opportunities, those grants, any source of funding that could really help them scale. We looked for partners that they could work with to be able to test their prototypes, also to scale their businesses, but also to generally understand how they can maneuver the market in general. But yeah, we need more players, we need more support when it comes to gender lens investing, but also supporting early stage women entrepreneurs. As Vera also mentioned, data. Data is also not very much available for entrepreneur support organizations or any kind of supportive organizations that are supporting women entrepreneurs. There's not a lot of resources available. So we are trying, through our learnings, we're trying to create a lot more resources for mentors through the constant evaluation, resources for startups, and also support organizations sharing our learning throughout the journey of our program. Lastly, access to skills and resources still remains one of the biggest issues. So we are focusing a lot more on mentorship. I think mentorship through women entrepreneurs or women leaders supporting directly these young women entrepreneurs. We've seen success in this area. We've also really tried to find a lot of experts in this field. This is still quite a limitation in Africa. And so we keep sourcing out experts, mentors, and investors to really help these women entrepreneurs to turn their ideas into sustainable businesses. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Melanie, coming back to you, I mean, TechnoServe's model is slightly different, but what are the barriers that you still find? I mean, is access to capital a challenge as you work through these value chains, or what are the biggest barriers still that you want to be helping to solve, as it relates to access to finance, or is it access to markets? What are the challenges that you're looking at and seeing?
Definitely access to finance is a big one, and I'll come back to it. But if I kind of focus on the inclusive agricultural supply chain development, one of the biggest challenges we see in the sector is that female entrepreneurs and workers operating within this space perform these roles, critical roles alongside men, while being tasked with, for example, other domestic duties, and there's this increasing burden. However, they kind of continue to be excluded from key services and formal value chains, which obviously limits their ability to sell or market their products effectively and increase their incomes. So sort of there's two strands to my response, and one is about kind of as we work with these agribusinesses to develop more inclusive supply chains, how do they adopt more kind of gender responsive business practices to kind of address inherent biases and social norms that can influence the way that businesses deliver services to women within their supply chains, so in our experience, the sort of using tailored approaches to ensure women and men from the same household can participate in training and sort of setting up services in a way that can reach women farmers and sort of adjust for issues around transport access, safety issues, as well as kind of time issues related to sort of restrictions on time. And then also applying approaches to increase women's influence over kind of income and farm decisions. So how can these businesses ensure that both men and women are registered as suppliers, that ensure that they are both present at the point of sale, and obviously consider the makeup of things like village buying agents networks and sort of extension teams to create safe spaces for dialogue and start to really level the playing field in terms of those discussions. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with agribusinesses at large, and then really demonstrate how that can really impact sort of performance. So for example, with Kentes, to go back to that example, we see that women sort of village buying agents are performing better than their male counterparts, are kind of outperforming on payback rates for working capital advanced, and on sort of more on track in terms of procurement targets. The other, I guess, broader sort of point linked to sort of my colleagues in terms of the access to finance is a big one for us, and we see a sort of massive gap here. And I think sort of for us, it's really been about demonstrating sort of the business case for these investments, and then actually seeing how we can influence mobilization of more private capital towards these businesses, predominantly by kind of working through our funding and through these types of technical assistance to fund kind of technical expertise to really identify sort of compelling opportunities and consider sort of how we can support these businesses to build a more attractive investment case, and also try to see where public and philanthropic funding can play a role in developing more appropriate finance products for agri-SMEs and smallholder farmers. So I think there's a sort of massive role to play around building a stronger pipeline of sort of investment-ready businesses, and to, I think it was Vera's point, that can sort of speak the investor language and sort of articulate the value proposition in a compelling way. And then there's also this point that there is still a continued role for kind of blended finance in de-risking these investments.
Great, thank you. So I think one of the things I'm hearing very, very clearly here is that we need to have climate finance with a gender lens, and really looking and tailoring that finance to meet the women entrepreneurs, meet the supply chains with the need. And I love the term blended finance, because I think we often don't use that enough, and we need to remember that, you know, businesses need different types of capital depending on where they are. Rosemary, turning back to you for a moment. Sarah had talked about the lack of access to data, and Andy's been working quite a lot with support from the IKEA Foundation in Kenya on improving the data around even knowing what are the growing areas of the green economy. And so I'd like to ask if you'd like to sort of just comment a little bit about where you see the ecosystem being able to go, in particular.
This work was undertaken by SCF for consideration by the COP, as I said, in response to the mandate from cop26 in Glasgow. The SCF, the next slide, shows that the SCF, under the guidance or the report, under the guidance of the committee, was innovatively put into 3 areas. The approach which we took looked at the 3 dimensions, not only on the finance flows for the 100 billion, which you see on the left, but also whether and how the needs of developing countries are being addressed, and the progress in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and the transparency on implementation. Now, a wide range of sources of information were used to provide quantitative and qualitative information on those three dimensions, and of course the interlinkages between them. There is a table in the report that provides all the resources used, and the methodological challenges and the limitations are also noted in the report. Two key challenges were identified. One was the lack of the detailed guidance on how to measure and track progress on the goal, and of course the limited data available and the consistency on climate finance flows in relation to the two other dimensions of the goal. Now the third slide, which you see in front of us, provides, if you go back please, provides the key findings. As I said, there is a wide variety of different views in how to account for the finding towards the goal that, of course, lead to a variety of conclusions. The chart, which unfortunately I don't think we are on the very right slide. I don't know how we can go back. Do we have 2 slides back? If you can go back 2 slides back, please. Because the chart, I wanted to give you the chart on the left. You go back.
I can't, they have to. Go back a slide,
please. Yes. The chart on the left shows the backward-looking data, which is based on different sources. And these sources use similar data but have different approaches on the scope of what should be included, such as public or private flows or grants or loans. In any case, none of the sources suggest that the goal has been met in 2020, as you can see. Now, if you look at the forward-looking estimates, however, there is a signal that the goal could be achieved in 2023 within a range of 101 billion to 106 billion as per the Climate Finance Delivery Plan. The next slide gives us, yes, this slide gives the dimension of how the goal is addressing the needs of developing countries. The report used a proportional comparison of finance flows to the needs reported in the SCF report of 2021, which is the need determination report. This comparison was motivated by the recognition that in terms of addressing the needs, of course, the volume of the goal does not match the needs, but in terms of what the finance is targeting, they are almost the same. It should also be noted that there is a mismatch in the time frame of the needs in the needs determination report, mostly from 2020 to 2030, while this report gives the flow which are in the range from 2019 and to 2020. And of course, as you can see in the visual at the bottom right, adaptation finance, you see that in the light blue, represent 28 to 34% of the finance in the 2019-2020 against the 14 to 52% of the share of the cost needs in the middle and the number of expressed needs at the top of the graph, as you can see. In terms of the sectors, almost half, which is 46% of the finance flow, is going to the energy and the transport sector, whereas other sectors play a greater role in terms of needs such as agriculture, forestry, and water. And with regard to the geographical distribution, the share of the finance flows by region are similar to the share of the needs expressed for Asia, which is 42% vis-a-vis the 39% needs, and for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is 17 vis-a-vis the 18% needs, but more finance is needed to flow to Africa compared to the needs. You have the needs of 36%, but the flows are just 26%. With this, Excellencies, let me hand on now to my colleague to continue with the rest of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Excellencies. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. On the dimension of the context of meaningful mitigation action and transparency on implementation, a key challenge is to establish any causal link to flows of finance directly. The data in that regard is quite scattered, and yet some notable trends since 2010 include, for example, almost all parties have signed and ratified the Paris Agreement. Parties communicating ambition on mitigation increased from 88 in 2010 when the goal was formed to 194 in 2021. An updated NDC results in up to 10 to 14% aggregate emissions in 2025 above 2010 levels, an improvement from 14 to 19% from initial NDCs. This range is based on NDCs up to the end of 2021, and including the information from the 2022 NDC synthesis report would lead to an improved range of 9 to 13% above 2010 emissions in 2025. That's a positive story, but we're still not quite where we need to get. Many sources of information point to the importance of transparency on implementation with regard to action and support to enhance mutual trust and accountability. Almost all Annex 1 parties have submitted fourth biannual reports by 2021 with information on climate actions as well as support provided. By 2021, 94% of non-Annex 1 parties have submitted a second national communication and 59% a third national communication, including information on actions and needs. 51% have submitted a biannual update report, which also includes information on support received. Next slide, please. The key challenges and lessons learned from implementing the goal include first the mobilization of private climate finance to and in developing countries underperformed relative to expectations, up to 60% below what was in the scenario of the 2016 roadmap by developed countries. The report identified some of the ingredients in scaling this up, not to mention cross-cutting enabling environment factors, finance to de-risk projects, and the role of MDBs and guarantee instruments. However, the environment to mobilize is now more challenging than even a year ago, requiring consideration by developed countries on how they will achieve the goal. The multiple economic shocks and high debt burdens, in particular in developing countries, create circumstances that will likely require more concessional public climate finance. Next slide, please. International public climate finance is critical, and the challenge is on managing the high demand for both adaptation activities and for de-risking mitigation activities. Overcoming capacity gaps in building project pipelines and making better efforts to mobilize private finance are important. Also, that increasing access to capital requires innovation, such as, for example, simplified access modalities to funds and innovative instruments to access capital markets. Overall, the report found that significant knowledge gaps hinder a thorough assessment of progress towards the goal. As mentioned earlier, there has been very little data-driven analysis on the linkages between the various dimensions of the goal. A key lesson is that robust goal setting is specific with clear metrics or methods at the outset to guide successful implementation. And with that, thanks for your attention, and now I head back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the good presentations, and this concludes the introductory part of this high-level ministerial dialogue.
We would like to now turn to the interactive part of the ministerial dialogue, and as was announced on the website, the Presidency has identified a number of guiding questions which we can see on our screens now, which will facilitate discussions during this ministerial dialogue. Based on these questions, and in order to kickstart our discussions, we would like to first give the floor to a few key icebreakers. Let me first invite our distinguished colleague, His Excellency Stephen Gilbert, Minister of Environment and Climate Change from Canada, for our first icebreaker intervention. Minister.
Merci beaucoup, coprésidente. Je tiens à vous remercier d'être parmi nous également aujourd'hui. L'objectif des 100 milliards reste au cœur des négociations. Et je sais que nous, les contributeurs des pays développés, restons déterminés à fournir des financements pour le climat et à faire en sorte que les fonds aillent là où ils sont le plus nécessaires pour s'attaquer aux causes et aux conséquences des changements climatiques. En même temps, une conversation honnête sur le financement du climat est une conversation équilibrée. We have to go back to 2009 and remember the context in which this $100 billion goal was very aspirational, and there was a lot of cynicism and skepticism about whether or not we would ever get there. And in 2020, we weren't there. We were at $83.3 billion, so part of the way, but we are getting there, but we haven't closed the gap yet. Last year, one of the key functions of the Climate Finance Delivery Plan was a process of driving more climate finance contribution to close the gap. And it worked. We've seen significant additional pledges in 2021, which are not yet built into the $83.3 billion. Last year's delivery plan also helped on transparency to demonstrate that the goal will be met next year. So the delivery plan was an important moment of recognition and input into key mandated documents, for example, the Glasgow Climate Pact and Standing Committee on Finance report, which we've just seen. This year's progress report shows progress where more efforts are needed. We listened to everyone, and that was a cornerstone of the report. We worked closely with contributor countries, met with developing country group chairs, as well as ministers from the Global South, organized 2 roundtables with civil society. The progress report tells an important story about where finance is going, provides further insight on predictability and transparency for the coming years. It provides also important examples of progress, but also highlights where more work is needed. And there are 4 areas, in our view, for further work: barriers to access, adaptation finance, advance greater leadership from NDBs, and private finance. I will speak to access and adaptation finance, and my colleague Jennifer will speak to MDBs and private finance. First, on adaptation finance. The progress report makes clear the expectation to double adaptation finance means going from $20 billion in 2019 to $40 billion in 2025. It also provides transparency on pledges made by contributors so far towards that goal. On access, it remains a significant challenge. There's lack of capacity, complexity of processes, and time needed to secure funding. Key issue is for all of us, and we are all united on that. A study on access was commissioned as part of the progress report, which identifying gaps and recommendations for further action. We need to reduce bureaucracy to facilitate access for projects proponents. There's advocacy for greater leadership from the multilateral banks to improve access, and again, Jennifer will talk about that. We encourage UNFCCC funds, GCF and GEF to harmonize approval processes with multilateral banks. And 3, to develop innovative approach.
Give me great confidence that yes, we can do this and we can make the change that we need to, and we can support women entrepreneurs to succeed and bring solutions to scale across the continent. So please join me in thanking each one of our panelists this afternoon. And again, just today is Gender Day, so thank you to men and women climate champions. So thank you all for joining me.